In this lesson, we'll be creating a small title that will have 3 pages in it, and we'll be navigating using a menu which I have indicated at the top here, and it will have animated submenu elements to help you navigate to the distinct pages. You can see here in my finished file, I have 4 distinct keyframes, and if I click over here, I've got a keyframe called video, and in there we're just going to assume facsimile content for a video. Over here I have one for a song file, again a facsimile of a movie clip with a song file in it, and then one more over here as a contact page which will have you put in your first and last name. Up here, and you can see on its separate layer called menu, I have the menu, which is a movie clip. Let me quickly click on that or double click that to open it and show you what that's made of. It's animated, and if I move my playhead to the beginning, you can see here we've got a button, and all my buttons do have instance names on them. And this one is going to be triggered with the mouse over to play once the mouse engages the button. So when we go mouse over, the playhead plays, and you can see here in each separate layer I have a button that animates out and gets more visible and then rests in its final position. And they are sequential, so when one ends, the next one begins, and there's 3 altogether here. And then we have this resting frame here, frame 20, which we have a stop frame command in here, and all the submenu buttons are now exposed and sitting on the screen. This big green aqua colored area is an invisible button, and it's used as a trigger to have the menu retract. So when you engage the green button, you are actually doing a mouse over, commanding the playhead to once again play, and we have taken all of this animation and reversed it over here in the track, so it plays out backwards like this. When the playhead reaches the end, by default it always goes back to the beginning, which is our start position, and again we have a stop command sitting there to hold that until the user runs their mouse over that menu button. Once again, that starts the whole cycle over. Alright, so there's basically 2 keyframes for the actions for the code. One to hold the position here, and to trigger the mouse over to play the playhead. And when the playhead reaches frame 20, where all the animated buttons are sitting on screen, we will have a pause in the frame, and each button has a instance name and a mouse over, or rather a mouse click attribute connected to it to play the playhead in its parent on scene 1, and it will direct the playhead to one of these 3 different keyframes. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. We will build it, but let me demonstrate it first by playing it in the browser. So here we are, and I have created this one to fit the browser, and if I mouse over, my submenu flies out, animates out, and if I mouse away, which is really mousing over that aqua invisible button, they fly back, so they disappear. Mouse up, I can mouse over them and trigger the playhead on my scene 1 timeline to go to the respective keyframes. And these keyframes are indicated with frame labels, just like that. And again, if I move away from the menu, it does animate backwards, and all the buttons are set to be invisible on frame 1. So we mouse over, we trigger the playhead within the movie clip called menu. They stop on frame 20, where we can engage them. And if we move away from them, we are actually moving over that invisible button, which triggers the playhead to continue and play the animation backwards and pause on frame 1 within the movie clip, which is the menu. Okay, so that's how all of that works, like that. There we go. So the next step will be to build this from scratch. So let me go back to Adobe Animate here. Alright, we're back in Adobe Animate here. So let's create a new file from scratch, and we'll start to build a replica of this. I'm just going to go up to File, New. And I'm just going to choose the standard size, which is fairly small in screen size. And be sure to pick the HTML5 canvas platform type. And then click Create. And as soon as that's done, let's save the file immediately. So I'm going to do a save as. And I have a folder here for this stuff. So I want you to name it your last name and lesson number. So I'm going to go _01 and just go _S2 for semester 2. All right, and click save. And as I said, I'm going to start one from scratch. I will reference my finished file, so I'm going to keep it handy over here. I also have a file here that kind of zeroes in on the animation that we can refer to later as well, maybe. But looking at my finished file, I've just tabbed over here. We've got 4 main layers on our scene 1 timeline. So let's just build the environment first, okay? We're just going to set up these layers and some keyframes. Now you can see here there are 4 distinct sets of keyframes. I'm going to spread them out like 5 frames apart so that they're a little easier to see and be able to read them. Technically, you could do this on 4 frames, okay? So here we go. And I'm just going to create my 4 frames and then I'll name them. So the top one will be called actions for my code. The second one will be called labels for my frame labels. And I'll just dedicate this layer for my frame labels. You can put labels on any layer, but I like to keep it kind of distinct here. And then this will be for my menu and my content. So I'll go content for this layer, and then for my bottom layer we'll call that menu. Now we may shift the stacking order here, but for now I'm going to leave it like this, and I'll just save my file. And let's start by creating just the main keyframe. So I'm going to go over to frame 20 and just drag downwards and just hit F5 to start to span these out over 20 frames. Now it's my labels layer and my content layer that I want to put a keyframe. So I'm on the Mac, so I'm using, and I'm in version, I'm actually not sure which version, but it's the latest version. I need to hit my command key to select the frame here and here. On the PC, I believe you just have to click it. But just isolate these 2 frames and hit F6 to keyframe that. And we're going to do the same thing down the road here on frame 10 as well as on frame 15. Oh, let me click away. I forgot to hit my command key. Now this will change version to version, I've noticed. So we just want to isolate the frames and set a keyframe on them. Okay. And I might as well go in and do some of the nitty-gritty and give these labels a name immediately. I'll start at frame 5 on my labels layer, and I'll call this one, let's see, what did I refer to it here? Video. Okay, so video, song, contact, and home. So I guess I'll start on frame 1 here. Home. Click on the layer, or rather the keyframe. Go over to your properties, and inside of the label, there's a window called name, and just input the name there. I tend to always use lowercase. I'll click on the keyframe on frame 5 in my labels layer, and I'll call that one video. And I'll do the same for the next 2 and designate a name for those. Isolate the keyframe on the layer, go over to my properties, call this one song. And then the last one I'll call contact. I'll select that and we'll type in the frame label for that. And I'm just hitting my enter key to enter that, and of course save every time you make a change. Okay. So I'll also do a similar thing on my content layer. I'll put a little text box up in the right corner to indicate that we're actually on a distinct separate keyframe. So let's move our playhead back here. And with my text tool, I'm just going to pick a color that's a little easier to read than that. I'll go with the bright red for now. And I have Verdana bold at 21. I'm going to leave it at that for now as well. I'll let you decide on your fonts and colors and so on. But I want to make sure that I go into the content layer and select that keyframe. And I'm just going to click in the top right and type in home. Okay, I will format it. I'm going to double click the whole thing, and under paragraph, I'm going to format it to the right. And just move it over a little farther to the right, and then copy it. Edit copy. And then I'll go to the next keyframe on the content layer under video, and I'll do a paste in place. And all I have to do here is double click to highlight the text and replace that with the new text, video. And I'll do the same for the next two keyframes. Move my playhead over here, select the keyframe under the song frame label in the content layer, paste in place, and then replace that text. So this one's for song. Okay, and then I have one more to do. Keyframe, move my playhead over that keyframe, select the keyframe in my content layer. Once again, paste in place that text, and then select it and replace it with the new word, contact. Okay. Now if you want to get a little more decorative with that, by all means, I'm just going to cut to the chase on the lesson here. I can click away to deselect that, and again, let's save. Okay, so for now, that will suffice. I can tell when I'm on each keyframe by that name in the upper right corner. Okay, so I'm going to go back to frame 1. I want to start the menu system now. So I'm going to go down to the menu layer, and I'll start just by creating a text element and turning that into a button. Then we're going to have to put that button inside a movie clip, and it's inside of that movie clip where we'll do all the rest of the work for the menu. So I'm just going to start with my text button here, and let's see, I'm going to change that color. I'm going to go a little more earthy. We'll go with this sort of, let's see here. I'll go with this orange color. And I'll just type in main, and I'm going to go what's called camel case, main menu. Uppercase on the second word, but no space. Now I'm going to format this to be formatted to align to the left, and then move it over where I want to have it set. Okay. So what I propose to do is I'll turn that into a button, and maybe for the mouse over, I'll change the word menu to a different color and also italicize it. So I'll start by converting this to a button. Again, ensuring that it was placed in the layer called menu in frame 1. Here we go. We're going to turn this into a button. Modify, convert to symbol. Type, button, and I'll call this main menu, and this is the name that it will show up as in the library. Okay, so it's a button, and as you know with buttons, to edit them we double click on them, and we'll see its timeline below. So now we're in the button called main menu, and here's the button menu's timeline. So we're going to go over to the overstate, click inside, and I'll hit F6 to create a keyframe. Then I will select the text and make my changes here. So I'm going to make that darker, and let's see here, and I think I'll also make it italic, bold italic, like that. So let's just see what that looks like. Yeah, and I think that will work. So let's just go back to scene 1. I am going to save. And I will now select it on the stage and proceed to convert this to a new symbol, a movie clip, which will embed the button inside of a movie clip, which again will have its own distinct timeline, and that's where the rest of that menu work will take place. So here we go. Modify, convert to symbol, movie clip. I'll call this one menu. Again, that's the name that you'll see in the library. And to get into that movie clip, I have to double click it, just like I would have with the button. So it doesn't look the same on the screen, but if I click it once, you'll notice in the properties it does call it a movie clip. It does label it as a movie clip. So let's double click that again. And now you can see over here on my navigation bar that I am in the movie clip called menu, and it has a brand new distinct timeline. So if I can, actually I'll save this first. I will refer to my original file, and let's take a look at what's inside of that timeline. There's a whole lot going on in there. Okay, so I will double click on this finished movie clip of the menu, and look at what we have here. We have a unique layer for the code, of course, for the actions, and unique layers for each of the buttons. Now there are actually 5 buttons on this page. This big aqua area is an invisible button right here, and it's on a layer called invisible, and it only occupies 1 frame. Alright, so what's going on here in the timeline? We've got these purple areas are called classic tweens, and we're going to use classic tweens today to animate. It's very much like a shape tween, except it will actually work on symbols. So if I just move my playhead back here, I'm just going to scrub it. I'm just going to drag it along here. And each layer, again, has its unique button. So here's the song layer. Now, each of these tweens has two properties that are changing, basically. The opacity and the location. All right? And they are containing buttons that I've already created. So here we go. I move across. You see it appear, and then it starts to fly across and finds its resting place in this keyframe, which happens to be 5 keyframes long. Okay, so that's the resting place for button number 1 called Song. Then, when that keyframe, when that button is frozen in that keyframe, we proceed to start the next animation on that frame. So that makes it sequential. When one stops, the next one starts. So now the video button will appear and will fly up and find its final resting place. And you can see the third one starting here, and it will fly up and over, become more opaque. And when we land on frame 20, there's a keyframe in my actions to stop the playhead. So this is the resting place. All the sub buttons have now animated and are sitting on their resting place, ready for the user to engage them by clicking on them. Okay, so you can see the keyframe for each of those buttons, including the invisible button here. This is the main menu button down here, and it's persistent, and it's throughout the whole span. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to animate the first half of these, and then I'll show you how we can duplicate those spans and drag them over and just reverse the frames. All right, so we're going to do a mirror version over here on the side of these keyframes, and we'll start by animating these. So again, we're going to need one layer for the actions and one layer for the 5 buttons. Whew, okay, so let's go back to our movie in progress here. I'm going to create those 6 layers right away, and I'll name the top one Actions. Now we already have one with our main menu button, so I'm just going to name this one Menu. I guess I could call it Main Menu. Okay, and then, oh, I see I did a typo here. Okay, and that noise you hear in the background are my dogs. Anyhow, here we go. Here, let me name these other layers intended for new buttons. Okay, so the top one, I guess, will be Video. And then the second one here, I'll call it Song. And I'm naming the layers right now. Third one, Contact. And the fourth one for the all-important invisible button. Okay, again, I should save this. There we go, save. Okay, so let's drop a new button on each of these designated layers now. I'm just going to go to my text tool. I'll select the video layer, and I need to be very conscious selecting layers when I'm generating new graphics. And let's see, I'm going to click over on properties here, and I'll just click and create some text, video, and I think I'll start them as a dark gray, and then when we mouse over them, turn them into red. Okay, so I'm also using Verdana Bold, 21 point. Again, I'll let you decide on those artistic details, but I am going to use my selection tool to position it where it should land, where I want it to land. And I'm going to say right there. The idea is that it will start here when it animates, and it'll be invisible, and it'll fade up, and then land right here. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and each of these and then turn them into buttons. So for now, I'm just going to hold my Option key down and duplicate that and drag it down. Now on the PC, it would be Alt, click and drag, and I'm going to make a third button here. All right, they're not perfectly spaced, so why don't I space them right now by shift clicking them all, and then going to Modify, Align, Distribute Heights, which will even the distance between the heights. Okay, they're all still on the video layer, and I still need to edit these to turn into the other words. So let's start with this one, and I'll just rename it Song. And then I'll come down to this one, and we'll rename this one Contact. Okay, so let me put them on their proper layers as well. I'll select the song one, I'll cut it, edit, cut, come down to the layer called songs, select that first keyframe, edit, paste in place. I'll do the same for the contact graphic, edit, cut, and then select the layer called contact, that first keyframe, edit, paste in place. Okay, so they're all evenly spread apart. Because I duplicated them with my shift key and my alt or option key down, they are perfectly aligned as well on the left. Let's just save the file, and I'll start to turn these into buttons now. So I'll start with the top video graphic on its own layer. With it selected, I'll go modify, convert to symbol, and this should be quite familiar to you now. Set it to button, and I'll name it according to its label name, video, and OK. And again, that's the name that will appear in the library. So I do want to create a mouse over feature on that button. So I'm going to double click it so I can edit and go on the overstate. Hit my F6 to create a keyframe, which adopts the graphic, and I'll select that word and I'll change it from gray to red over here in the properties. Okay, and that's good for that one, and we'll go back to our menu layer up here, and I'll select the next element down, which is still a text element. I'm about to convert that to a button as well. Modify, convert to symbol, button, and we'll call this one song. Again, that's the name that it will take on in the library. I'll double click it so that I can edit. I'll change the overstate. I'm going to create a keyframe, select the text in that keyframe, and change its color in my properties to the bright red. And I'm good with that one. Let me come back to the menu here and select, go to my selection tool, select the last text element, the word contact, convert that to a symbol, choose button, give it a name, call it contact, and again I want to edit that, so I double click it, go inside of its own timeline, select the overstate, create a new keyframe. I'm using a shortcut F6, and that isolates that graphic that was adopted. I just highlight it, go to my properties, select the new color. There we go. All our buttons are done with a mouse over feature. Now I'm just going to save my file. And at this point we can create our invisible button. So let's go down and select that frame, and we're going to use rectangles to create the invisible button. So let's go to the rectangle tool, and it's best to make sure your stroke is turned off and that you are not on object mode. Okay. Color is irrelevant, but I'll just leave it this bright red. And what we want to do is we want to basically create like a body of water around this text as if the text was an island. Let me show you in the finished file what I mean. See this aqua area? That's what we want to do. And give it a lot of space away from the graphic, because what it's going to do is it's going to act as a mouse over trigger when you kind of exit the menu graphic area. Okay? So we will create that now just by creating graphics that surround it. You don't want to get too tight on the words, so give it a little space. But you can go pretty far away from it, which is actually good. Okay, so I've enclosed it, but I want to close this gap here. And I'm going to close this gap up here a little bit, but I want to allow, see this white clear area is where the mouse can travel without triggering the animation ultimately to make itself disappear. So that's pretty good, I think, for the invisible button as far as the area is concerned. So let's select that. Again, select the whole thing, and we're going to convert that to a button. Then inside the button, we'll edit it to make sure that it's what's known as an invisible button. So modify, convert to symbol. Make sure it's set on button. I will name it invisible. Okay, and click OK. Now, it's not invisible yet, of course. It's this big red blotch. So let's double click that. And what makes a button technically invisible is if you drag the content from the up area to the hit area so that there's nothing left in the up. And in our case, we don't want anything in the over nor the down state as well. So we just drag that over carefully, ensuring that the graphic has moved to the hit area. Now, it still looks red here. Once we exit the button, go back to menu, it's going to be represented with an aqua color, and in runtime, it's completely invisible. The aqua color is there for you as an author to know where it is and to be able to work with it. Okay, so let's just click back up to menu, and there is our aqua colored invisible button. That's a big step too, so let's save that. Okay, so at this point, we are ready to start some animation. So let's just span this to start with. We'll span everything across 20 frames. I'm just going to drag down frame 20 across all the layers and hit F5 to span those. Again, I'm going to save. Okay, we'll move our playhead back to frame 1 here. So the idea is to animate all of these sub buttons, starting invisible over here and moving over and resting where you see them right now. Okay, so we'll start with the video button. I'm just going to go to frame 5. And actually on my Mac, you need to isolate it. I'm going to use my command key to select, but I believe on the PC you just select the frame. And let's just click F6 to create a keyframe. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this keyframe. Actually, you know what? Here we are going to have a 5-frame space, in fact, yes. So I just keyframed it there to preserve it. And I guess I will click another keyframe over on frame 10. It's going to ultimately be invisible in this whole first 5 frames, okay? Again, I will select that frame and hit F6 to keyframe that. So that's ultimately its final resting place, and that will just span as far as frame 20. You'll see what I mean here when I get to it. I'm going to move back, though, to frame 5 and select it and actually move it to the left where I want it to start the animation. So I'm basically going to line it up with the left of main menu right there. Okay, so the idea is that when I create a tween, it's going to go from there to there. Okay, so we can create that tween right now. Let's just right click on this frame. And we're going to use classic tweens today. They do well when we want to reverse frames, ultimately when we want to create our mirror images. So let's choose create classic tween. It appears purple with a line. Looks very much like the shape tween in the timeline. Okay, and here I also want it to be invisible. Because it's a button, I can click it on the stage and I can go over to color effects and choose alpha and just make sure my alpha is set to 0. And watch when I drag, it will slowly become more visible and assume 100% alpha by the time it hits that keyframe. So that's my first animation. Let me hit save and we'll start our second one. So I want these to be sequential. So when this one starts, or rather stops, I want the next one to start. So I'm going to come down here and select this keyframe here, or rather select that frame and make a keyframe, F6, and that's where that one's going to start. So it will stop over here, so I will also keyframe that frame there. So by selecting it, my playhead is moved over. I could have moved my playhead then selected, and again hitting F6. And I'll come back to this frame, and then I will move this word over to line up with the left of that word as well. So I'm holding my shift key while I do this, so it will maintain the same line. Then I can right click this frame, create motion tween, or rather, sorry, classic tween, create classic tween. And I will select it on the stage so that I can affect its visibility using my color effects alpha. And it did go back to 0 there, and again I will drag. So that's sequential. So if I go back here, the video comes out, and then the song comes out. You saw it. I'm going to have to delete these over here eventually. But let's just go down to this frame here and line this next one, the contact button, by selecting that frame, keyframing it, F6. And this one will stop over here. So I'm going to keyframe frame 20 with that one as well. And let me just select that frame, F6. Okay, and then come back to this frame here and adjust its location to line it up. Again, I'm holding my shift key down and I'm going to line it up with the left of here. Then I'll select it on the stage so I can affect its color effect alpha feature, which is its opacity. And then I will right click here, create classic tween. Okay, and there's all the animation for the 3 sub buttons. Now let's just clean this up and get rid of these elements in the beginning here. So while we're on this frame, you can actually select these because it's all keyframed off, and just delete those. Now when it animates, there we go. Okay, let's save that. That's a big deal right there. Save. Okay, so let's go to frame 20 here. Now we're going to keyframe the last frame on the other buttons as well. And I'm going to keyframe the invisible also, and then delete it. I didn't quite do that yet. So we'll put a keyframe on each of these. F6 right here. Oh, let me just do that again. I just hit the wrong button there on the keyboard. Select that frame, F6. Okay, and the invisible button also, like I said. F6. Okay, and over here I will actually come back for a second and delete that invisible button at the beginning part. And now we have this and the invisible button right there. Definitely want to save that. That's more or less its finished state in the first half. So what we're going to do is we're going to select each of these sequences in the layers and duplicate them and then flip them on this side. Okay, and I'll ultimately span the action layer out. So I can select all the content on this layer by selecting the layer name. Then I'm going to come over here. On the PC it would be Alt click and drag, and just make sure you clear that area and just snap it to the right side like that, and then let it go. While it's still selected, right click it and choose reverse frames. That's partly why we created a keyframe here. It kind of holds the place, right? And now that one is inverted, so we'll do the same for the next one down. Select the layer name, which selects all the content in that timeline on that layer. Then over here, Alt click and drag that whole sequence, and then just drag it to the right side of that frame 20, and then right click it, reverse frames, and we'll do that once again for the contact layer. Highlight the layer, then select all the frames in that layer and drag them with the Alt key down, right? Your Alt key has to be down here. Or on the Mac, the Option key. Again, I'm going to reverse these frames here. And look, it looks like an upside down pyramid in a way. Now we don't need anything for the invisible. The invisible should only exist on frame 20. But I do want to span the main menu out, so I'll just come to this last frame here and just hit F, or rather this frame here. I think I'm going to ultimately delete these keyframes, but I'll hit F5 right here. And we'll do the same thing for the actions layer up here, F5. So let's delete these 3 keyframes. I'm going to select them here. That's a Shift F6. There we go. And I guess I'll span these out one more frame here. F5 and F5. Yeah, I could have done that a little easier. Okay, so now there are no keyframes at the end. They're not necessary because once the playhead hits the end, by default, it will start back at the beginning. I do need a keyframe, however, in my actions layer on frame 20 because I'm going to want to freeze my playhead there and also add code to click these 3 buttons. Okay, so I'm going to select that frame right there in my actions layer, and once again, F6 and save. So that's the beginning to end sequence. We still need to put some code in here and so on. And we also need to create or add instance names to our buttons. And the instance names will happen on frame 20. Okay, so let's start actually by calling up my actions panel. And I'm going to put a stop command both in frame 1 and frame 20. So I do need to select that particular frame. I'm reminding you I'm inside of the movie clip called menu here. So I am using my wizard. And it's a little small here, but I'm going to scroll down till I see stop. Okay, this timeline. Next with this frame. And I'll do that also over here on frame 20. So I'll move my playhead there, select frame 20, and do the exact same thing using the wizard. select stop on this timeline, click next, and with this frame. Okay, definitely want to save that. All right, so at this point, we are going to add instance names to all the buttons, as well as this one. So there's 5 altogether when you include the invisible. I guess I'll come to the first frame actually, and we'll add an instance name to our main menu button. So we'll just call it menu underscore btn. Okay. Oh, it looks like I put the wrong character in there. Menu, and it didn't like it. Underscore btn. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to move over to frame 20 and name the rest of the buttons. There's highlight the button. In this case, it's the video button. Call it video underscore btn. Hit your enter key. I'll highlight the song button, give it a name, and I'm again using all lowercase. Song underscore btn. Then the contact button. Contact underscore btn. And very importantly, the invisible button. Okay, and I will name it invisible underscore btn. Definitely want to save all of that work. So really the heavy lifting is done. We're going to start to engage this, but I need to go back up to the main timeline, I think, and put a stop command in there. I don't think I put one in yet. No. So in my actions layer, I'm back on the scene 1 timeline. Since we're in kind of code mode here, I'm going to select that first keyframe in my actions layer and again add a stop command using the wizard. Stop on this timeline with this frame. Okay, and save. Now the idea is that inside of this movie clip, when I click the sub buttons, they're going to actually affect the playhead on the scene 1 timeline, not in its own menu timeline. So that's known as a parent. This is a child of the scene 1 timeline. So when we address the navigation, we're going to have to address the navigation as a parent because we're going to be giving the code from inside of this movie clip. Okay, so let's go in there and start to code that up. So we'll start though by just engaging the toggle feature, which is when I mouse over this, the animation is engaged, and then it stops here. And then when I mouse away, in other words, when I mouse over the invisible button, it engages the animation again and sets it off backwards, and then ultimately stops on frame 1. So there's a toggle effect. So we're going to do this in 2 steps. We'll do the toggle feature, then we'll do the submenu. All right, so the toggle feature will be in the first frame. And again, I'm using my wizard, so just be sure you select that keyframe in your actions layer. Very important. Add using wizard. This time it's going to be based, I'm going to see if I can make this a bit bigger here. I'm going to base it on a mouse over feature. And what do we want to happen? We want to trigger the play feature. So play. Play this timeline. Click next. On mouse over. Which button? The one called menu underscore btn. There we go. So what that should do is it should trigger the playhead and it'll start to play the animation. Now when we get to frame 20, it's going to stop. So let's do the same thing, but we're going to trigger it based on the mousing over the green invisible button. So we will select that keyframe in the layer called actions and add using wizard. Again, it's a play command, right? We're just telling it to play along, and when it hits the end of the timeline, it will come back to frame 1 on its own. So we'll say this timeline. Next, based on a mouse over, and this will be the invisible button. Looks like I spelt it wrong, but that's fine. And I click finish and add. All right, let's test that feature. Let me save that. It's a big deal here. If this works, we can finish off with the 3 sub buttons. So I'm going to go test movie here in browser. Okay, so when I mouse over this, it should trigger the animation. There we go. And when I mouse away, they should go back to where they came from. There we are. Okay, so anytime I'm going into that invisible button area, it retracts the menu as you see here. All right, so we are successful on that. So the next step will be to click these buttons, and you'll see it indicated on the label here that we will be navigating to the parent keyframes for those elements. So let me just close that. This is my original that I showed you at the beginning, but I'm just going to toggle back to Animate here and click back on my timeline. While I'm in frame 20, make sure that my playhead is on that frame in the actions layer, and we'll continue with our wizard. So I'm going to address 3 of the buttons. So what do I want to happen? I want my playhead to go to and play, or go to and stop, sorry. Go to and stop. Go to frame, label, and stop. I will say this timeline, even though I have to go in here and manually change it. First, I'll deal with the frame label though. This is for video. Remember, we called the video frame label video, and that's what should go in there. Now you have to come back here, and just before the go to and stop, click and type in the word parent so that you are affecting the parent's timeline. Add a dot at the end of parent. So this dot parent dot go to and stop. All right, and then click next, and this will be on a mouse click. And which button? The video button. So video underscore btn, finish and add. I will save that. I'm going to test that because if I know that one works, I have the full confidence that I can continue with the next 2. So I'm using my keyboard right now to go to the test feature. So if I click video, it changed to video over here, so I know that it worked. Okay, and there we go. And we'll close that off, and we'll just continue from here. So 2 more buttons to do. Song. All right, so don't want to click on the item. Actually, that was a mistake on my part. Let me click on the frame label. If you were using components, yes, that might have been the way, but we're using the wizard here today. So you want to address the keyframe that the wizard will drop the code into. And we're going to continue. Go to frame label and stop. This timeline, we're going to type in the frame label called song, and then we'll have to add a little more code here after the dot. We're going to add the word parent dot, and then click next, and we're going to say on mouse click which button. In this case it's for the song, so song underscore btn, finish and add. One more to do here. Add using wizard. Go to frame label and stop. This timeline, this will be for contact, so I'm typing in the frame label here on prompt. Click behind the dot there so we can address the parent on not this timeline. So we're bypassing this timeline and we're jumping up to the parent. Then we're giving this command to search out the frame label called contact. Okay, and how will that be engaged? On a mouse click with the button called contact right here. Okay, finish and add. Definitely want to save that. If I didn't make a mistake, we should be done. Now you could add supplemental graphics in your scene 1 timeline in the content area, but other than that, we're good to go. So let's give this a test. Okay, there we are. So we know the video. I'll try song, and that worked. Contact, that worked. Video, that worked. Okay, and if I roll away, the menu does retract. All right, so I will add just a tiny bit of content here, and I want you to do this as well. So under video, I'm just going to draw a box here, and I will use a stroke, and maybe no fill, or maybe I'll just use a light colored fill here, and just draw a box down here. And maybe on my song one, I'll just draw a bar. And you know what? Just to complete the thought, these should be all in a movie clip, because if there's something going on, they should be movie clips sitting in that keyframe there on the main timeline. So I'm going to make this a movie clip. I'm just going to call this a song. So if I ever do want to come back, oh, I'll have to go song movie clip, yes, because I already used this word. Song movie clip. And let me go back here, just again for posterity's sake, I'm going to select that whole graphic, convert that to a movie clip. I'll call this one a video. MC. And again, that's the name that appears in the library. Okay, and then under contact, here, not necessary to make a movie clip, but do put your first and last name. So I'm just going to click on the dark red there, and I'm going to turn off the stroke. And first and last name. And, oh, I guess I need to edit that in the properties panel here, and I need to learn how to spell my name. All right, so I'll select all of that and go apply that color over here. And maybe make it a bit bigger. And drop it down here. Okay, so there we go. Let me just save that. One last test. Okay, contact, song, video. And that's our assignment for today.